Hello and welcome back to That Tassie Wargamer. In the last video I just finished shooting, we looked at modelling specific water-based acrylics. Looking at all the different ones I've worked with over the last 30 years, actually 35 years, and the goods, the pros and the cons. This video I'm going to be looking at the non-specific paints that I use in my modelling. I obviously haven't brought some of the tins of house paints that I've tried using in the past, but everyone's probably given them a go. These are the ones I'm talking about, the ones that you can have on your hobby desk. And they may be able to play some part in your miniature painting or your smaller scale terrain painting. All of them are reasonably new. Again, I love looking around stores and just finding different things and use. I'll buy them if they're cheap. Obviously, I'm not going to buy them expensive, but if they're cheap enough, I'll give them a go. And yeah, sometimes I find some gems. The first one I'm pretty sure I would have bought were these Montmartre, probably available around the world. I know they're not made in Australia. They're made, I don't know, probably made in, yeah, they're made in China. So if you recently bought them, you might want to rub alcohol all over them. These are all right, and the reason I like them is because they're cheap. I think they're about $2 a bottle from my local sort of cheap shop. 100 mils, so they're going to last a long time. I have bought a couple, had to replenish a couple, mainly because some of them, this one in particular, burnt umber, I find is really good just for doing a base coat on any of the buildings I might be doing, buildings or terrain. As a bit of an undercoat, it just goes really well. It's a bit of a light burnt umber. I have seen darker. It's not a bad colour. It's a bit of a generic sort of brown, not quite as dark as Mission Brown, but it's all right. They can be a little bit lacking in pigment, so a little bit of opacity, which is why I wouldn't use them for fine browns on my figures, but using it as just a broad stroke undercoat, or not undercoat, but a base coat. It goes okay. That's the other one that I've used sometimes, burnt sienna. I've got quite a few. I've bought their whites, their blacks, their browns. The black's okay. Again, I think I've actually used it for miniatures. Yeah, I'm pretty sure I've used it for miniatures because I remember putting it into my wet palette recently. Good colour. See, it's not thin, pretty thick, so I'd obviously much rather a thicker paint because then we can always thin it down. But if you've got a wet paint, a watery paint, there's no way you're going to get that pigment back. So yeah, the lamp black, if you get the lamp black, I have used it for minis because I actually have had trouble with black. Some of the blacks from my smaller pots tend to dry out really quick. So the black is really good. So Montmartre. Second ones I have bought, well actually over the time I bought a few smaller ones, singles. Dervan Matisse. This is a lovely colour. I don't use it too often, but it was an ultramarine blue. I thought I'd try it. Professional artist acrylic. I bought this from a professional art store. Beautiful colour. I think it lacks a little bit of, it has to go on maybe a little bit thicker, a couple of coats, depending on what you need it for. Obviously, I'm a very thin coat painter anyway. I don't use a lot of thick paints. But yeah, Matisse is really good, but certainly more expensive than the Montmartre. But yeah, certainly usable with miniatures. Again, it depends on the colours. You might get reds and yellows and oranges that just won't look so good. But some of their thicker pigment, generally colours, yeah, that's not too bad. This one here, I've used this one, the skin-based tone. I generally use it. It's a bit lighter than, I know I'm old-fashioned. I probably shouldn't be using this type of colour for skin-based, but I do. But it goes right with that dwarf flesh. This goes okay as a highlight straight over the top. It does the trick. If I highlight, sometimes I don't even bother highlighting anymore. I'm so busy just trying to get minis to the table. So Jojo Sonia's. Actually, I'll tell you what I could do another time is make a video where all I do is spread this stuff so you can actually see what it looks like. But pretty good consistency. Yeah, actually that's not a bad thing. As you can see, it tends to go on okay. The great thing about these is they're like a squeeze pot in that you put a little bit on your palette and put it straight back in. So they last a long time. That's probably one of the older ones that I've got. ones I bought more recently, because they also sell them at my local one, is Kaiser Colour. We've actually now recently had a Kaiser Craft open up near us. Now red, I do use red sometimes because I've been doing red coats. A red can be a problem. I find it can be lacking pigment. It doesn't go on quite right. This is the red that I use when I'm doing my British red coats. Bugger the model specific ones. I have found Kaiser Colour red, just a perfect colour. Like I put red on quite thin. Don't ever go on my painting because they're only for table quality. Goes on quite thin. This is over a grey undercoat. These guys are just about finished. It looks a really good colour. It's not too red when I put it on reasonably thin. It doesn't lose its pigment, so it goes on. I reckon it would even go on a black undercoat really well. Kaiser Colour, that's my favourite one. One of my favourite ones. They're black. Oh, sorry, actually it's the Montmartre, I should say. Montmartre black is also usable with your miniatures as well. Easily, just use it. Actually, I've just mentioned that, haven't I? Oh, losing the plot. I haven't even had a beer yet. Yeah, Kaiser Colour red. If you can get that one, that one's worth it. Now like I just said, we've since had a Kaiser Craft store open up, not too far from us. When I say not too far, about 20 minutes away. And when I went in there, they didn't have all the ranges of dark reds or bright reds and bright blues. But what they did have are these more subtle colours. And I'm currently painting up my World War II 28mm 3D printed buildings. And these are fantastic. They just give that really nice, sedate, not overbearing colours. So you wouldn't want to use reds and blues, and likewise, yeah, if I was to use one of these colours from a smaller pot, they wouldn't last long. House paint can sometimes look over the top. These, being water-based, really good. They come in all sorts of old-fashioned sounding names like antique white and pistachio, slate. I've got quite a few more, but as you can see, they all sort of very similar. They're all that, I can't remember the type of colour you'd call it, but they've got some great, really old, they look really good on World War II buildings. They do some old darker ones too, so if you need to do tile work or even the wall with terracotta for bricks, you can. And a brown mud puddle. So they're really good. So they do look good on World War II buildings. I haven't used them on miniatures. Bear in mind, sometimes the only thing I find is some of the pigment can be a little bit lacking, and you might have to go with a couple of coats. But that could also just be me not putting enough primer on my 3D printed buildings, which I'm still learning how to get right. I just realised I've just gone past these too. At some point, I can't even remember when I bought these, probably not that long ago. They're a little bit more expensive, so I'm pretty sure I would have bought them at an art store. Atelier Free Flow Artists Acrylics. I have to admit, I don't use them too much. I've sort of got the sienna and burnt umber. It probably would have been at a time when I wasn't happy with the ones I was getting out of a tube. Yeah, not too bad. Not too bad at all. A little bit lacking in pigment. I have seen burnt umbers probably a little bit, or some of these colours a little bit thicker, but that's not too bad at all. Yeah, and so it's nice, it's consistent, there's no lumpiness in there, and it's probably exactly the same as the day I bought it. So don't discount non-specific paints. Paints are paints are paints. Like I said, Citadel would have you believe that you have to buy their paints to paint their miniatures, or to paint Warhammer or 40k miniatures, but you don't. Basically, a lot of the colours you get there, they're ultramarine blue wasn't named after ultramarines. It was a colour called ultramarine. So it's not specific to Citadel. They don't own that name. So if you were to go into any art store and you look for ultramarine, you would get a colour very, very similar. Oh, God. Very, very similar to that. So give it a go. And sometimes, especially if you can go into your local pound store or dollar store or whatever you have. We have shiploads here and a few others. You'll often see them. If you can pick them up for a couple of dollars, give them a go. And you might see a few little gems like my Kaiser Colour red. Not to everyone's taste, but certainly suits me, considering I've just about finished painting all my red coats. Hopefully I won't see the light of day for a little while. But I'll probably end up buying, I'll probably go into Napoleonics and buy a few more. that's it for now. I've got probably, I can give you a quick look at my wet palette. I still struggle with it. Sometimes it can get a little, I find it can get a little bit too damp. I didn't go for an expensive one. I've got a decor box. Inside, I've got some paper towel that's been damped down. This time, for the first time, I have also put in a little bit of alcohol. Sorry, methylated spirits. There's a tear in it. There was a tear in it. That's why the paint went through there. Fine. Some paints keep really well and they will be there for days afterwards. Others will dry almost while I'm using it. So I don't know. But I do like a wet palette. What it finds is, it saves me time and it's less effort, because sometimes if I've missed something on a model, look at, oh no, now I'm going to have to find that paint, I'm going to have to shake it up, I'm going to have to use it just for one thing, whereas that colour's always on my palette. So if I'm doing a miniature, I normally do batches, 5 to 10. At some point I'll go, oh wow, while I'm doing the reds, I'll realise I've missed that bit of black. The black's still on the palette, so I can just quickly grab another brush or even just wash that brush off, just do that little bit of black there on the spot, and then I don't have to have fiddled with bottles and then whatever. The colours that I've been using for that day are likely to still be fresh and there on the palette that I can just quickly dip the brush into. I don't do an awful lot of blending, so I really use my wet palette just to keep my paints fresher and longer than usual. I do a little bit of blending, I guess, but not too much. Like I said, I'm now focused on getting my minis to the table. You're probably looking to go, geez, you got a lot of bloody paint there. Yeah, I know. Some, with that black and some of the others, I find I'd use it and then it would dry, so I'd put a little bit next to it and it would dry, and over time, once some bleed into another, easy enough just to tear off this greaseproof paper and chuck another one on. I've normally got a few sitting around. So that's my wet palette. Yeah, but if you don't use a wet palette, I recommend you do. The other thing it allows you to do is get a better consistency. You find it's going to be hard to get a consistency right out of the pot, unless you're constantly dipping your brush in and trying to get it in the pot. It's never going to work. So at least with a wet palette, you can get the thicker paint onto the wet palette. You can add water or add flow medium. This is the one that I use. I do like using a flow medium. You'll notice that it's very similar. If you ever notice a paint separating in your wet palette or in a palette, you'll notice it's that when it separates, you'll have the pigment, and the other thing you'll notice is something very, very similar to this, to a flow medium. So I would imagine that a lot of the paints, especially the paints that last longer, the paints that I'm still using from 20 years ago, often will have this type of fluid in them, and I reckon those ones that are drying out use something different, maybe almost, I can't even guess. This was only $2, maybe $3 or $4, I don't know, from my local store. I've had it quite a few years now and it's still really good. So instead of, if I know I have to thin a paint down, I'll just add a drop of this to the paint when it's on the wet palette. Sometimes after that, I won't do it again. I'll just always dip the brush in a bit of water to get that consistency if I find it thickening up. You know, I'm probably rambling. Planning on doing another video very soon, because I have just about finished my miniatures that I've been painting the last few weeks. They've almost, half are now varnished, half are waiting to be varnished, army painted dip, and none have been sprayed to anti-shine yet. I'm going to be using a different anti-shine this time too. If you guys, if you are the type of painter that just wants to get figures to the table, I reckon, actually, even if you're not, even if you do want a good quality, I would recommend Quick Shade Army Painter. $40, it's certainly gone up in price. But I used to, I think I've mentioned it before, I used to be a detail painter, and I would use inks and washes and all that. And when I started, actually, for years I was only a painter, never got into wargaming. I've told this story before somewhere in another video. But when I started wargaming, I realised, geez, I'm never going to get an army to the table if I keep doing what I was doing. So I looked at a few videos, went down the path of Quick Shade, would block paint a lot of my miniatures. You know, it still take a while, still take some decent effort. And I tell you what, when I first used Quick Shade, I was so frightened about putting my first painted miniature, putting it with Quick Shade. And let me tell you, I brush it on. I have tried dipping. Brushing on is definitely the way to go for me. But when I did use Quick Shade, it came out, and I've realised now, it makes your miniatures a lot stronger. They're not going to chip, but also they just have a great look about them. Anyway, 15 minutes is just about up. That's gone fast. So hopefully I'll bring out another video very soon. Thanks for listening. Goodbye.